Welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about, did early Christians copy pagan resurrection myths to help inspire or even lay the framework for the Easter story? This is the question historian and archaeologist Dr. Edwin M. Yamauchi asked in his essay, Did Christianity Copy Earlier Pagan Resurrection Stories? Dr. Yamauchi starts by laying out the history of the scholars and institutions behind this pagan origins mindset in academia, noting that in the early 20th century, scholars like Sir James Frazer and his peers argued that the resurrection of Christ was patterned after Near Eastern dying and rising gods. Scholars in the 1930s, such as M. Gogol and A. Loisy, interpreted Christianity as a syncretistic religion formed under the influence of Hellenistic mystery religions. Further, the history of religion school influenced scholars at the time to view Christian baptism as an initiation rite similar to those of Adonis, Osiris, or Attis. The current scholarly consensus is that the evidence for a mythical origin of Christ's resurrection is unsatisfactory and that the parallels are lacking. Modern scholars of comparative religions have largely abandoned the staple idea of dying and rising gods. Bible and ancient Near Eastern scholar Trygve Indi Medinger even concludes that there is no prima facie evidence that Jesus' resurrection is a mythological construct drawn from surrounding rites. So, what are the claims of evidence that this is the case? Let's start by dissecting some of these specific pagan gods and their stories to see if Jesus' resurrection really parallels or just straight up copies any of these pagan myths. Beginning with the pagan gods Dumuzi and Baal, Dr. Yamauchi finds that rituals for Dumuzi or Tammuz were primarily concerned with his death and disappearance rather than his resurrection. In 1960, a discovered poem titled The Death of Dumuzi showed that Inanna sent Dumuzi to the underworld as her substitute rather than rescuing him. Scholars note that since a resurrection of Dumuzi was not celebrated in cultic festivals, it played no significant role in the literature. Akkadian text mentioning Tammuz coming up is simply a reference to the belief that peoples held with the dead would arise to partake in funerary offerings, not a bodily resurrection. Now, regarding the storm god Baal, Ugaritic ritual texts contain no indication of his death and rising. This one is interesting to me because I often see this charge online, that Yahweh is a pagan storm god, but this seems to not be the case. Moving on to Adonis and Attis, Yamauchi finds that early texts and pictorial representations of Adonis show no trace of a resurrection. His myth focuses on his death and the wilting of vegetation. The four texts that do speak of Adonis' resurrection are late, dating from the 2nd to 4th centuries AD. Attis was part of a cult involved in mourning his death, but the joyful celebration of his resurrection, or hilaria, is not attested until the mid-2nd century AD. The bloody rite of the Torabolium, a bull sacrifice, in the Attis cult is first attested in AD 160, making it a stretch to claim it influenced Paul's 1st century writings of Christ's death and resurrection. Therefore, any similarity that the Torabolium shares with the Passion likely arose later as a competitive response to Christianity's promise of eternal life. Moving on to Osiris and other various Egyptian beliefs, Osiris' story regards the god as being resuscitated by magic to become the god of the dead, but he was not resurrected in the sense of returning to life among the living. Even in Egyptian belief, the deceased did not rise from the dead. Instead, entities of personality like the Ba and Ka hovered about the body. Further, pharaohs were identified with Horus while alive and with Osiris only after death. Ugaritic expert Mark S. Smith notes a massive hole in the theory here. If Osiris, a well-known dying god, didn't actually rise back to life, the whole dying and rising category starts to fall apart. Finally, let's address Mithraism and modern myths attributed to Jesus' resurrection. Scholarly consensus today is that Mithraism arose as a Roman phenomenon no earlier than the late 1st century AD. There is no archaeological or inscriptional evidence for Mithraic mysteries in the 1st century BC. Internet posts will claim that Mithras had 12 disciples or was born of a virgin, but the historical record actually says the opposite. Those are what Yamauchi calls modern myths. There's zero evidence for them in any Mithraic texts or monuments. To conclude, there is no compelling evidence that pagan dying and rising God myths provided the framework for or influenced Jesus' resurrection. In fact, it seems the opposite may be true. So one has to ask the question, since these pagan myths were so easily influenced by a newly formed religion, what credibility did the ancient Near East see in the person of Jesus of Nazareth?